So did Trump call Putin, and what does the new White House administration propose regarding the Russian-Ukrainian war? This and other topics we will discuss right now. My name is Iryna Uzlova. This is our YouTube channel War and Politics 24, and my guest today is Yuriy Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and also communication instructor at the University of Wisconsin and a country supervisor in Rock Country, Wisconsin. Yuriy, hello, glad to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Iryna. Always glad to see you and like to welcome our listeners and viewers.
We still don't understand for all this day whether there was a phone call between Trump and Putin in the coming days or not. How important is that communication in general between Putin and Trump, or maybe it's like a standard process of preparation for possible future negotiations?
It appears that if we work with a safe presumption that Donald Trump has always said that he's interested in having good and strong relations with Putin, and that is of utmost importance to him, that helps to, I think, consider all that is happening, because in the midst of this catastrophe that is occurred just with the plane going down and over 60 people losing their lives, in that context, discussing the relations with Putin, I think it highlights the need that Donald Trump has to be recognized by Putin, to be acknowledged by Putin, to be respected by Putin, and it makes everything look a little more, I think, understandable when we look at it under that angle. Because if we look at it like, what is he trying to do? How is this helping to end war in Ukraine? How is this helping people of the United States or Ukraine? It may be difficult to understand some of his decisions. But looking at it from the point of view of trying to impress Putin and trying to get Putin to acknowledge him as a good friend of Putin's seems to be a very important task for President Trump. So when he says that he may have spoken to President Putin and he may have spoken about not this, but something else, what that ultimately highlights is that Donald Trump has a good relationship with Putin, which is what Donald Trump wants everyone to think. Now, it is up to Putin to say whether that is so in his opinion. Does Putin think that Trump has a good relationship with Putin or not? And that, I'm afraid, puts Putin in a position of power here in this dynamic. So whether Trump actually spoke with Putin, what he actually spoke to him about, all of this being done between those two men, this does not involve any of us anymore, because we now have a leader who is, who has more common sense than, I guess, anybody else, because he can announce who is at fault for air catastrophe before the investigation apparently really even started. But if he has answers to all the questions, then we're just so lucky. And if he wants to have good relationship with Vladimir Putin, then it's only at what cost is the question that he wants to have this good relationship with Vladimir Putin. Is it at a cost of Ukraine? Is it at a cost of American allies? Is it at a cost of American national security? I guess those are the questions that we're trying to figure out, at the cost of American democracy, perhaps. And those are, but that's the elections have consequences, and that's what's so important to understand, that people in the United States made this choice. And so because we as voters in mass decided that we generally support this person in their approach, then all the individual people who could be standing in line are less likely to do so, because they're kind of going against people's will to some extent. And so if president wants to have good relationship with Vladimir Putin, I guess maybe it's senators that could stand up and say, maybe this is not the best for our national security. And I think they are doing it somewhat through questioning aggressively Tulsi Gabbard for a position of Director of National Intelligence, which is a very influential position, and a position that has access to a ton of information, and a position in which having somebody who speaks highly of Vladimir Putin and Moscow is not the best thing to do for our national security. security. But who is going to say that? Who is going to speak up for it? So I think that we are in a process of observing how much Trump can get away with changing standards, changing norms, changing laws, changing alliances, all of that. And I think that his conversations and possible conversations with Vladimir Putin should be viewed with that understanding.
And Yuri, how in general can Putin and Trump use this plane crash for political propaganda purposes? Because we see a strange reaction of Kremlin. They say it's not Russian people. Then they say, yes, some of them are Russian people. And only their Ministry of Foreign Affairs told something. Putin kept silence as usual, as we understand. Even Peskov, I didn't see which things did he say. Nothing, it seems to me. So how?
Iryna, I think we have, before we go into the propaganda angle of this, which is absolutely fair game because this is who we're dealing with, we need to acknowledge the catastrophe that has occurred. It's a terrible tragedy, and many of those people were an important part of figure skating community in the United States, and as such, many of them had connections and roots in Russia and Soviet Union, and so this is a tragedy for their families. This is also tragedy for Boston Figure Skating Club, which suffered a tragedy 60 years ago when another air catastrophe cost them loss of many of their outstanding figure skaters and coaches. And so now, again, the club is struck by this tragedy, and it is terrible. And the fact that President Trump was assigning blame for this before all the bodies were pulled out of water, it doesn't sound right. I think people listen to President Trump and go, something doesn't add up. That doesn't make sense. Why are we politicizing this situation? This feels wrong. But the situation will be politicized, like every situation will be politicized. And when President Trump said, they're pointing blame at all the Democrats, that this could have been somehow caused by, even though he is the president, he is the one who fired all these people, his administration put out this email that I think freaked out the entire federal workforce, saying that they have a week to decide if they would like to resign their positions, and then they will, and that's it. This is not how people get into federal government, why people get into federal government, or how they expect to leave federal government. So all of this is very strange, and it throws the system into chaos. And when we have a system in chaos, then we're going to have consequences. And I think this air tragedy was one of the consequences. But the way it is going to be looked at, I guess I'm glad so far that Ukraine hasn't been accused of this. But maybe it's only a matter of time before Ukraine will be accused of this, because it seems like in Trump world, behind every tragedy, there's either Biden or Ukraine or both that are seen somehow around the corner. So right now we're seeing that this is mostly being used to further the administration's agenda of fighting any DEI initiatives, or as I would put it, anything that doesn't help white people. If there's a program that is not specifically designed to help white people, it's designed to help not white people, now it's illegal. Now those programs are not allowed, even though the program for the air traffickers was specifically introduced by President Trump during his first cadence. So in this instance, he's actually pointing one finger at himself and at others, and four fingers at himself. Three. So this is a difficult situation for a mathematician, but I think that politicization is something that is going to occur, and it also is something that is causing deterioration of trust in our society very quickly, because when we see that there's a tragedy and it cannot be treated as a tragedy and it's going to be politicized, it is a poison pill in our society, because presidents should come out and say, this is an important moment. We need to express our grief and sorrow and support for people and say those kinds of things, and then leave, not stay there and and say, but this is actually a fault of these people, and it's not my fault, I had nothing to do with it, and all that kind of stuff. It's very disconcerting, because that means that that's leadership. That means that we're going to have people who are going to be thinking that this is an appropriate way of behaving, because the key is to make sure that nobody blames you. And it's really just it's terrible for society. And beyond that, I think that it's very disrespectful to all the people involved, including air traffic controller, who is absolutely, I can't even imagine what that person is going through. And so, and the fact that there's going to be an investigation, and pilots, and everybody who works at the airport, and everyone who's flown to the airport. This is the time to show support for people at this difficult time. But instead, we have a president who mostly specializes in pouring gasoline on any crisis, which means that it's hard to imagine how bad the situation could get and how fast, because there's going to be a number of crises, and there's going to be response that we've seen. It almost feels like we had a public health crisis when President Trump left office, and we're back to having public health crisis now that he's back in office.
Neither Ukraine nor Russia is likely to achieve their maximalist goals as a result of the war. Achieving peace will require hard work, states U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in an interview with journalist Megyn Kelly. Rubio emphasized that both Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and Russian dictator Vladimir Putin have their own internal interests. But if you imagine you're Ukrainian and the Russians have made you suffer so much, and now you're going to let them keep the land, I mean, people would be upset about that. You would understand it, the Secretary of State added. So let's listen to his statement and back here.
First, let me say this. We think what Putin did was terrible. Invading a country, the atrocities he's committed, he did horrible things. But what the dishonesty that has existed is that we somehow led people to believe that Ukraine would be able not just to defeat Russia, but destroy them, push them all the way back to what the world looked like in 2012 or 2014, before the Russians took Crimea and the like. And in the result, what they've been asking for the last year and a half is to fund a stalemate, a protracted stalemate, in which human suffering continues. Meanwhile, Ukraine is being set back 100 years. Their energy grid is being wiped out. I mean, someone's going to have to pay for all this reconstruction after the fact. And how many Ukrainians have left Ukraine living in other countries now? They may never return. I mean, that's their future, and it's endangered in that regard. So the president's point of view is this is a protracted conflict, and it needs to end. Now, it needs to enter a negotiation. In any negotiation, both sides are going to have to give something up. I'm not going to pre-negotiate that. I mean, that's going to be the work of hard diplomacy, which is what we used to do in the world in the past, and we were realistic about it. But both sides in a negotiation have to give something, and that's going to take time. But at least we have a president that recognizes that our objective is this conflict needs to end, and it needs to end in a way that's enduring, because it's unsustainable on all sides. It's ultimately unsustainable. For Russia's paying a big price for this in their own economy, their inflation rate and the like. But at the end, that's the president's position, and it's the truth. And I think even a growing number of Democrats would now acknowledge that what we have been funding is a stalemate, a protracted conflict, and maybe even worse than a stalemate, one in which incrementally Ukraine is being destroyed and losing more and more territory. So this conflict needs to end.
Who's the bigger?
So, Yuri, what sense and aims do you see in this statement, and what concessions is Rubio talking about, and will they be painful for both sides?
I have mixed feelings when I watch Secretary Rubio give his comments, because on one hand, I can't help but be happy for him, because this is the position of his dream of a lifetime. Except for being President Rubio, I think that being a Secretary of State is a huge accomplishment for somebody who, with Cuban roots and immigrant, family and all of that, and a rise so high in America and United States. It's a dream story to a certain extent. But then the other side is that in order for him to accomplish this dream, he had to forsake and throw under the bus, a lot of his principles and support for democracy, for freedom, for standing up to Russia, for crying out loud. about. I thought that used to be important. And now Secretary Rubio is repeating President Trump's point of view, which is absolutely legitimate, reasonable, and what you would expect Secretary of State to do is to repeat their boss's point of view. And the boss's point of view is, what was Ukraine thinking getting into this fight with a country that's way bigger than it is? It was unrealistic to think that Ukraine could possibly beat Russia back because Russia is so big and strong. I feel like I should be saying this with a Russian accent, that Russia is so big and strong. What was Zelensky thinking? And so we discussed this in the past when we looked at President Trump's interview to Sean Hannity in Oval Office, and now we see it's very helpful to see Secretary Rubio speak basically the same intentions, the same almost words about, except using word rather than word carnage that President Trump loves so much. The word stalemate is what Secretary Rubio chooses to use, but either way, it doesn't sound good, it doesn't look good, and it's just unfortunate because I thought that the goal should have been to help, to make sure that we will do everything to help Ukraine win. And the fact that President Biden and his administration struggled for so long to say those words was such a cause of criticism against them by so many people who felt that if President Biden could just say and could just outline a strategy, we would be so much better off. Well, they were right, except that now we have a person who wants to wrap things up now and then see whatever happens. And if Ukraine has no guarantee of security going forward, that is not a concern of President Trump. President Trump is looking at the world very clearly, geopolitically, in terms of like looking at a globe as a cake, I guess. And this part of the cake is ours, and that part of the cake is yours. And Ukraine is part of Vladimir Putin's territory as far as Donald Trump, I'm afraid, is concerned. And so the fact that, or definitely Europe, which is so far away from us. And again, he wants to make a good impression on Putin. It's hard to make a good impression on Putin by actively helping Ukraine beat Putin. Is it reasonable to assess that Ukraine could never win? Sure, if the help that would be, if what Secretary Rubio is trying to do succeeds, then of course Ukraine could never stand a chance against Russia. But if Ukraine would get sufficient help from the United States, then there could be a different outcome. That's what's not being allowed for the possibility, is that if the United States acted differently and decided to support Ukraine, then actually there is no guarantee that Ukraine wouldn't be able to make it to the border. So this interview and this point of view makes certain presumptions which are, I guess I would say at the very least, are questionable. And then it builds an argument on those presumptions, which naturally is faulty because the foundation is faulty. So rather than say that we had a responsibility to Ukraine, we have responsibility to our allies and all of those kinds of things that I think Secretary Rubio would like to say if he only could, if only he could. But instead he says things that he's supposed to say, and he's going to have a difficult job, because when he talks about difficult negotiations, that means that he's thinking that he's going to go to maybe Moscow, maybe Switzerland, and he's going to have these long negotiations. But reality is that when his boss is interested in trying to impress Vladimir Putin, I don't think that Secretary Rubio is going to be treated with the respect that Secretary of State of the United States honestly deserves. And so I think that he has got himself into a very unenviable position, doing a very difficult and challenging job that is most likely going to fail, for which he is going to be blamed, and probably going to cause him to lose the position of Secretary of State. But that was the decision he made when he decided to stop being a senator, step down, and instead become Secretary of State in the Trump administration.
What I think, does Putin have Plan B?
Does Putin have a plan? Well, I mean, I think it depends of what they did the night before, because there's a plan B used to be a reference to an abortion pill, and I'm not sure that that's going to be like, I don't know what Trump and Putin did and whether what they will need after that. But who has a plan B here? Putin? I think Putin has a plan A. He wants to take Ukraine. I think he's just going with his plan A, and now he was waiting. We've heard for years that Putin is waiting to see what's going to happen in American elections, in presidential elections in 2024. And if, depending on the outcome, he's going to act. And I think we saw the outcome. We're experiencing the outcome. And in this outcome, Putin immediately found himself in a much stronger negotiating position than before. And so his plan could be to stop now and to continue later as soon as he can, while Ukraine is basically without additional help, is trying to recover. And whether it's going to take weeks, days, months, or years, either way, when we have a guarantee now essentially from President Trump that for as long as he's president of the United States, which is at least 4 years, Ukraine will not be a member of NATO, then I think Ukraine's best chance at securities, I mean, yes, possibly European Union, those kinds of things, perhaps maybe even a separate military union that consists of Baltic states and Ukraine and Poland and countries that are neighbors of Russia, that understand Russian danger more acutely than anybody else. But outside of that, becoming a 51st state of the United States might be, especially if California is thinking about leaving, I think territory-wise there could be some comparability. So maybe if California leaves and Ukraine comes in, maybe that could be a guarantee of security. And I'm only joking about it in the sense that we have now entered the imperial present, and now in this imperial present, being part, maybe people have a freedom for now of choosing which empire they would like to be part of. But either way, we're looking at a very divisive world. We're looking at a world where there very well could be world peace, but not for the reasons we would like and with big nuances.
Yuri, how do you think, does Trump provide consultation or communication or his team with Europe? Because our security question is a question about security of all Europe and telling the truth of whole world too.
I think before President Trump was sworn in, the question was, if he's going to become president, is he going to just stop aid to Ukraine, but will allow Europe to continue to aid Ukraine, or whether he will try to stop Europe from helping Ukraine? And I think at this point, we can at least be sure of saying that he is certainly not making it easier for Europe to help. I think that he is putting Europe in a situation where it feels kind of squeezed between American demands for increased spendings, which on defense, which I think Europe wants to do anyway, is likely to do anyway, but the tempos seem to be a little overly aggressive, just logistically speaking. But the goals are good, but nonetheless, there's a squeeze on that side because the nuclear umbrella of America decided all of a sudden to attack its holder. Like they were holding an umbrella, all of a sudden the umbrella is like attacking them. So they're feeling squeezed. And on the other hand, Russia, which is also feeling, they're breathing down the neck, and whether Putin will stop, where Putin will stop, nobody really knows. He might go for boundaries of Russian empire, or depending on how things go then, right? If things are going well, maybe he could grow the empire. So what that means to me is that Europe stands between a very important and difficult choice that maybe is not a choice at all, and that is whether to support Ukraine and to make sure that Ukraine has all that it can possibly need to defend itself and to stand up to Russian aggression, or to take all the resources that it still has and try to preserve them for themselves, because if they don't feel that without American help Ukraine doesn't have a chance, then why should they use their weapons there when they might be needing them themselves so soon against Russia directly? And I think those are decisions that are just going to be made on the defense level, probably by each country individually, but I think those are the choices that Europe is having to deal with, because Trump is not going to make things easier. He's not going to make it easy to support Ukraine, other than in a sense that it's the right thing to do.
Yes, President Donald Trump said, hello, tariffs, goodbye, America. These words he addressed to BRICS, and Trump reiterated that the BRICS countries face 100% tariffs. This will happen if the association creates its own currency. According to Trump's post on his social network, Truth Social, we see it on our channels. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, commenting on this statement, said on January 31 that there was no talk of creating a common currency at all. So what should we understand about this potential step by Donald Trump and his surrounding? And can Trump destroy the economy of BRICS if he wants?
I think if he wants, he can do a lot of things because Donald Trump is in charge of the most powerful country in the world. I think that he understands that for competition, he needs a strong dollar, and that's, hopefully is important to him. But I think with Elon Musk and cryptocurrency pressure, it is and a growing debt of the United States that is likely to grow exponentially due to likely new tax reforms that this administration will try to put in place. The national debt is going to grow. There will be more likely push towards cryptocurrency as a way to deal with the debt, possibly. And I think that there's dangers to U.S. dollar that could be coming more from Elon Musk than from BRICS countries. On the other hand, Elon Musk has good relations with many BRICS countries, and in general, we're dealing with authoritarian states that Donald Trump, in general, should be friendlier with. So there I refer to past history where Donald Trump can be very aggressive in his rhetoric, only then to use that as a negotiating technique to really tone down his rhetoric and show that he has accomplished all he was planning to accomplish, and that's how great he is. This type of approach we see all over the place. The only difference is that in the end, it seems like authoritarian countries, in the end, Donald Trump has like a love affair with Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator, but our democratic neighbors, Canada and Mexico, are likely to actually get slapped with real tariffs, which we're going to find out very, very soon. And Canada, for their part, it seems like quite fearful of what impact it's going to have. And that was not what we were talking about before the election. So I feel like there's been a lot of changes, and the fact that we were speaking of China, and we maybe even speaking of China as an adversary, or BRICS countries, whoever we're speaking of as adversaries today, doesn't mean that there won't be a complimentary post from President Trump if they appear to agree to his demands 5 minutes later. I think that's what constitutes chaos, and I think that's what we're just getting used to. And on one hand, people are trying to tune out and not pay attention. On the other hand, that's not necessarily best solution either.
Yuriy, thank you very much for today's conversation. Thank you for your opinion and for your time. See you next week. Take care.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Yuriy Rashkin, host of Rashkin YouTube, was with us. Please subscribe to our YouTube channels, Rashkin Report and Rashkin Report in English, and War and Politics 24 and 20.